Hello again and welcome to Backyard Farmer. I'm Kim Todd and we're so glad you can join us for the best landscape advice on television. For the next hour, we'll be answering your garden questions with our faculty panel from Nebraska Extension. We have our bug guy, Fred Baxendale, tonight.
Great to be here.
We have turf guy and weeds, Matt Soshik.
Thanks, Kim. Nice to be here.
We have down from O'Neill, Amy Timmerman, Rots and Spots.
Hi, Kim.
And Sarah Browning is going to answer all those horticulture questions.
Good evening, everyone.
You know, you can get your questions answered by dialing 402-472-1212 if you live in Lincoln. Our toll-free number is 800-676-5446. Emails and pictures for future shows can be sent to byf@unl.edu. When you send us those questions, please tell us as much information as you can. Attach those pictures as JPEGs. You can also follow Backyard Farmer during the week on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, iTunes, and Pinterest. Before we get to questions, let's take a look at samples. And Fred, you have an array.
Yeah, a plethora.
A plethora. All right, let's pleth and see what that is.
So these are 4 different types of galls that are all caused by mites, called an Areophyid mite. And again, these are, you can see the diversity that we see here, and I'm just going to point them out to you. So this is on linden or basswood trees, and it's called a nail gall, or sometimes a finger gall, and they're little projections. This is on hackberry, and it's a witch's broom. So it's called a hackberry witch's broom gall. This is on silver maple, and these are called bladder galls, and if you can sort of look at them, they look, I guess, sort of like what do you think a bladder might look like? And of course, this is the very familiar ash flower gall that we've been seeing and talked about a couple of times again. Again, none of these cause any particular injury to the tree, although they can be certainly less than aesthetically pleasing. But again, they generally don't cause any injury, perhaps maybe the witch's broom gall.
So. Excellent, and part of nature's...
Oh, yeah, and again, this is all part of nature's wondrous pageantry.
All right, thanks, Fred. Okay, Matt, what do we have in that lovely vase?
Mine's not quite as interesting, but it is a grass, and it is a weed. Downy brome is what I'm going to show today, and it's probably what you're seeing a lot at this time of year, mostly because it's got these seed heads that are coming out. It's a winter annual that generally, is pretty easy to control, or not control, is out in the fall, and then in the springtime, it's a small grass, and it grows up very quick, and then you get these seed heads and this tall, clumpy grass, in thinned areas or in your lawn. And what you can do now is really, there isn't much you can do to control it. Mowing it off is the simplest way to take care of it, take care of the seed heads. And then, when the summer heat comes, they generally just die back, and they don't make it that far. At this point, the easiest way to control it would just be to mow it off.
Or pluck it and put it in a vase.
Or pluck it and put it in a vase like I did. It's pretty easy to pull out, too, if you don't have too many of them.
In a 1,000-milliliter beaker.
Yes, 1,000-milliliter beaker.
All right, Amy, something not so pretty over there.
Of course, I had to bring the death. So we've been getting a lot of questions about blue spruce and spruce losing their needles and different components. And so I brought a spruce sample tonight, similar to what we're seeing, are getting a lot of calls about. So, there might be needles on the tips, and then we're losing the needles further back. And then we're also getting phone calls where we have needles not at the tips and working their way back. So there's 2 different needle casts that we deal with. There's Rhizophora and Cerococcus needle blight or shoot blight on them. Both of these are fungal diseases, and they can be a real big challenge to differentiate between each other. So usually we're going to be looking at the color of the needles and the time of the year that we're seeing those needles falling off. But it's also important to know, as we're seeing these needles falling off of our blue spruce, if we have a lot of shade on the inside of our blue spruce or even neighboring blue spruce, we'll actually see a lot of needle drop too. So sometimes it can be really confusing. Is it really a disease or is it an environmental component? So pictures, when you have any questions about it, is really critical in helping us answer those questions, and always taking a sample in to the extension office for closer examination. But Cerococcus and Rhizosphere and needle casts are two main diseases on blue spruce this year.
Excellent. And if it looks like that, that's a former branch.
It's a former branch. They won't grow back.
All right. Thanks, Amy. Sarah, our favorite dwarf winged euonymus.
Yeah, so I brought a couple of samples here to talk a little bit about pruning and specifically what not to do when you're pruning, okay? So yeah, we have burning bush here. I'm going to turn this around because I think you can see maybe a little bit better on the backside. So this was pruned, well, maybe it's better this way, sorry. So you can see this was pruned right here with just kind of a flat cut at the top of the stem. And so we have a little stub right there. And whenever you make a pruning cut, it's going to initiate growth right below the pruning cut. And so on this particular sample, you can see that we've gotten several shoots, 4 or 5 shoots that have all come out from fairly close below that pruning cut and formed kind of a little bushy growth here at the tip of this shrub. And if you get a whole shrub like that, you can get such dense growth on the outer edge of the shrub, it'll shade out the inner part and you won't have any leaves farther down inside the shrub. And so you end up with a plant that has got all this shallow layer of growth on the outside but nothing on the inside. It gets to be pretty ugly. So ideally what you want to do is something more like this, where you have this shoot was pruned right above a secondary shoot, and that would direct all the new growth to come into these secondary shoots. And we have nice spaces, nicely spaced branches down the length of this twig. And that's really more what you want to do. So whenever you're pruning, prune to a secondary shoot. Don't make flat cuts at kind of an arbitrary point on the stem. You'll end up with a much more nicely shaped and healthier plant.
Excellent, Sarah. And pruning really is an art.
It is, yeah.
And fun.
Yeah.
All right, Fred, you get the first picture question.
Oh, excellent.
This is a lot of fun. The question was submitted by this person's mother, who's in Hampton, but she took this picture in Roswell, New Mexico.
Yeah, that's
And she
cool.
thinks it's a wasp dragging away a spider. She wants to know what they are and whether we have both these beasties in Nebraska.
Yeah, well, this is called, technically it's called a tarantula hawk. And in fact, it is hauling off a wolf spider. Now, we tried to figure out if that species, that exact species, is here in Nebraska, and we're not really sure from that particular image. But what we know is that these tarantula hawks are very common throughout the Midwest, and certainly up into Kansas and into Nebraska. So these wasps do occur here. So again, this is a beneficial insect. Once it hauls the spider into its burrow, it lays a single egg on that spider, and then into a burrow, and then the spider, the larva from the wasp develops on that spider. So again, these are beneficial predators, and we want to preserve them for that reason.
And stay away from them because they really look scary.
Well, and they do have a formidable sting.
Okay, another reason.
Don't try picking it up.
Okay, Matt, a North Bend viewer, has patches of something seeding into their mixed turf, that kind of whitish, already gone to seed stuff. He says he's never seen it before, and he wonders what it is and why is this happening this year.
All right, so this picture looks to be like annual bluegrass, and it's a very common weed, mostly there's a lot of it in golf courses. It can be in home lawns, and it typically isn't annual, but it can be a perennial also. Some of them make it through the winter, and they're prolific seed producers. So generally at this time of year, they're the only ones seeding out, or 2 to 3 weeks ago, they would really be seeding out in a fairway or lower mowed turf. But really, to control it in a lawn, there's really no good way. If you have small patches of it, the easiest way would be to just pull it out because it has a very shallow root system. And generally, they grow in wetter areas. So if you can manage the water, they don't tend to like the dry side. And also the heat of the summer, they typically kind of fade away. So that's one way to get rid of it too.
All right, thank you, Matt. Okay, Amy, this is fun. A couple granddaughters digging in the garden. They started shouting about finding teeth sticking up out of the ground. And then they found that the teeth and they're about 1/4 inch in size, and they're hard, were attached to a hard root or branch that looks a little bit like a foot. And they want to know, what is this?
I love their description of it. It was very clever, and really states what it is. This is most likely a type of stinkhorn or a puffball. Both of these mushrooms have kind of encapsulated eggs per se, and then they'll start popping up and emerging. They're usually feeding on, if it's a puffball, they're feeding on dead decaying roots or anything like that that's in the soil. They don't cause any major issues, and actually if you're interested, puffballs are edible as long as you eat them before they turn black and get that big puff of black spores coming off of them. But if you don't like them, all you need to do is go and pop them off and throw them in the trash or into your compost pile with no big concern. But it's just a fungus decaying some dead material down underneath the soil.
And it really is not a human foot.
No, it is not a human foot.
All right. Sarah, we have a viewer who has a lovely patch of ferns, but apparently the lovely patch of ferns is attempting to take over the neighborhood.
Yeah.
She's wondering how to control them.
Ferns can be kind of aggressive, if they like a spot and they get really well established. So not knowing what you've tried already to get rid of them, you may have to go in with some Roundup and overspray them. Or another method that you could try would be to cut them down, cut each clump of leaves down, and then do a stump treatment where you're painting the cut stumps with Roundup. Now, that said, though, this is probably going to take several applications to kill these because they can be pretty aggressive and vigorous, and they can come back. So hit them once, give them a chance to grow back. Once they start to put out the next group of leaves, hit them again. You're going to have to be kind of persistent, but I think that you can get it under control if you really work at it.
Or you dig them up and have a plant sale.
True, you could do that too.
All right, thanks, Sarah. Well, Nebraska Extension recommends following an integrated pest management strategy when dealing with insects, weeds, and those disease issues around your gardens and home. Occasionally, you're going to have to use pesticides and chemicals to control these issues, and there is a myriad of products from which to choose. Which one is right, how and when to apply. You can find out all that information on the product label. Here to help us understand what to look for is Corey Brabeck from Earl May Nursery and Gardens.
Today we're going to talk about the importance of reading pesticide and herbicide labels. It's very important to know what your problem is before you come into the garden center so we can help you correctly identify what the issue or what the problem is. What we like to do when you first come in, if you bring a sample or a picture, we'll take you over to the product and we'll often show you the back of the label, how to mix, proportions, everything varies. So let's say you have a powdery mildew problem versus a leaf spot problem. The proportion of the product or the mixing of the product can vary greatly. We'll also look at the very front of the product and we'll show you the active ingredient. So this product's name is Infuse, but the actual active ingredient is called propiconazole. And so if you watch different shows like Backyard Farmer, they will often talk about the trade names of product versus the actual chemical name of the product. It's very important to look at the precautionary statements on the back of the label. And most of these labels are very diverse. There's a lot of pages and pages of information. And so what we'll often talk about is if a product needs to be applied on a calm day, on a windy day. We'll talk about temperatures. Most products like to be applied below that 85-degree temperature range. And some of the products, depending on if it's a weed control or a fungicide control, may need to be applied when it's cooler. We'll talk a lot about surfactants, and what those are things you mix with different chemicals to make the chemicals stick better, whether it be a weed control or a fungicide. And that also has precautionary statements to go along with it. So in a recap, it's very important to know what your problem is before you come into the garden center. That helps us identify what your issue is. And a lot of times we'll see samples or we'll just hear stories about, hey, my plant has a wilting problem or a spot or I see a little insect. And so the picture and or the best descriptions we can get helps us identify whether we get the right fungicide, insecticide, or combination product. The same goes for weed controls because that can vary greatly. There's also a lot of federal regulations that go along with that. And so it's very important for us to know what you're dealing with there so we can help you apply things at the right level and the correct amount.
We do make recommendations from time to time about these projects, but to get the most out of your application, you really need to follow those label instructions. If you need help understanding what to do, you can always talk to your garden center professional or your extension educator. Do that before before you use that product rather than saying, ooh, made a mistake. So, all right, Fred, you get the next picture question. This is a semi-dwarf contender peach, southwest Nebraska. So she's got a peach in southwest Nebraska, wonderful peaches for at least 3 years. Then she started seeing some oozing at the base of the tree. She had peaches, but the pits would split in half and the peaches spoiled after picking. Yeah. She's seeing the oozing. She's wondering if she's losing the tree. Is there something? She's used a complete fruit tree spray. She values the pollinators. So how in the world is she going to get the peaches and what's going on?
Well, that looks to me like peach tree borer. And that's the kind of symptom that you see, the brown cast around the base. They overwinter, peach tree borers overwinter as larvae under the bark, and then they sort of migrate down, and you see they accumulate near the base. So, I'm concerned about that tree, and you'd certainly want to go on, if you're going to try to save that tree, you might want to go on a spray treatment. And the products that you'd want to use are things like bifenthrin or permethrin that are, insecticides. So, that they, synthetic insecticides that they could use. And again, timing's important. You probably want to put one on in early July, maybe the third week of July, and then maybe another one about the middle of August to cover that whole period when those borers and the adults, which are clearwing moths, would be coming out. So again, you might be able to save that tree, but it looks like it's in pretty bad shape by the time they get to that point. So it's worth a try.
Okay, thanks, Fred. All right, the ubiquitous turf wants to live where the lovely garden phlox is, Matt. How do they get rid of grassy weeds in something like this?
Well, grassy weeds in flowers or any type of broadleaf that you're trying to keep can be difficult. I know one good way of doing it is pulling it out, which would be the safest way. There is a product that works on grasses only where it doesn't affect dicot species, which grasses are monocots, and it's called Flazaflop, if I pronounce that right. It's also known as grass be gone, and fusilade is another one that the common names of it, but it works on grasses only. So if you go out and you spray this product, it should kill the grass only and not affect the flowers or some of the other dicot species that you have. And it's always good to test a small area, or if you can, pull the flowers out of the way and spray the grass only. And another thing would be to, like I said, test a small area first. And then I did hear of somebody using this product where they did spray it and they sprayed it in their grass or in somebody else's lawn and they killed it. So be very careful where you apply this because it will kill grass, and that's what it's for. So you want to be cautious of how you're using it, and also make sure that you're not killing things that you don't want to, because you will be liable for those applications.
Pull it.
Yes, pull it. Then you don't have to worry about the liability.
All right, thank you, Matt. Okay, Amy, this is really a strange picture.
Okay.
Two of her peonies are, and they're 8 years old, and they are that yellow, and the rest of them are fine. This is in Fremont. She's wondering, is this some strange disease of peonies, or is it something that's in the soil or not in the soil?
So I looked at this picture quite a bit. That glaring yellow automatically wants me to go toward nutritional, either iron or nitrogen, thereabouts. But if it's only 2 peonies out of a bunch, I'd be more concerned about the whole root structure of that plant. It could be a nutrient component, but those roots could be in a root ball, they could be root bound. We could be looking at a root rot issue that's preventing the uptake of those nitrogen and of those other essential minerals and nutrients that are needed by those plants. Also, with the wet weather we've been having, maybe it's a little too wet in that area. So I would probably check to see the moisture. If it's really wet, try to pull back the mulch so it can dry out, and try a little bit of fertilizer, see if it's going to green back up. Otherwise, it's probably more of a long-term root issue, and it's at this point in time, it's really hard to manage a main root issue with that large of a peony. You probably could potentially dig it up and pull it or remove it or split it or something like that, and look at those roots a little bit closer too.
All right, thank you, Amy. Sarah, we have had some hail in some parts of the state, and we had a question a couple weeks ago about hail damage on rhubarb. Well, here's a picture of hail damage on rhubarb. And the question is anything to do, what to do, can it be eaten? And then the next one, of course, the follow-up is they're flowering too. So then what?
Yeah. We have some environmental conditions like cold nights, which can cause rhubarb to flower. I know mine at home is flowering now too. So just go ahead and cut those flower stalks down and you can still eat the rhubarb. So with hail damage like this, what I would do is just, any stems that are broken and wilting, obviously, trim those off, clean it up a little bit, get them out of the garden. Stems that are a little pockmarked with some hail, but if they're not broken, they're still well attached, could still be left on the plant. I wouldn't worry about shredded leaves, that's not a big deal. But let those well-attached stems stay on the plant because it still needs foliage to photosynthesize. And as it continues to grow this spring, you'll get more new leaves coming out and they'll look better. Even some of these pockmarked stems though, you could still use those. You could still let them develop and cut them later on and then just trim off the bad spots.
All right, thank you, Sarah. Well, it's always fun to take a visit to our garden each week to see how things are shaping up. The wet weather really hasn't hampered us too much. Here to tell us more is Terry James.
This week in the Backyard Farmer Garden, we've seen almost 5 inches of rain here in Lincoln, so not a lot of soil work going on or planting going on right now, but we are getting everything ready. We did get our potatoes in before it started raining, and as you can see, they're just emerging out of the hills that we have in the ground. Haven't seen a lot of growth of the one that we planted in the potato pot container. So as soon as that starts emerging, then we'll start adding a little bit more soil in that container. We also did a soil test on both our in-ground beds and our raised beds. So it's very interesting to see what kind of soil we had, how much organic matter we had in it, and all of the chemicals. So it's a really good idea to make sure that you at least get your soil test done every couple years in your garden. Very easy to do. And as you can see, we're still hardening off a lot of our plants and we're ready for the summer, so we're ready to get those plants in the garden. Stop by the garden and see what's growing this week.
Those master gardeners are just hankering to get planting, so hopefully we'll be able to do some of that this weekend. We are going to wait until that soil dries so we don't stomp it back into oblivion, and that's a good suggestion for everybody else that's watching. All right, Fred, a Hastings viewer, has zucchinis. Wants to know how best to control squash vine borer from killing the plants.
That's such a challenge. So the bottom line is the key is that you need to control the borers before they tunnel into the stems. Because once they've done that, about all you can do is push some soil up on the over the root system, and hopefully it'll continue to grow. So a couple things you can do. One, it turns out that the adult is a clear-winged moth, and it's bright red in color, and it's really kind of pretty. And you can be watching for those. And when you start seeing those, or even before, you need to look right down on the very base, right at the ground level, and look for tiny little eggs that are laid right at the ground, right above the ground level, in the top inch or two, right there. Okay, and then once you see that, then you can treat them, and permethrin and many products would work to control them. But the key is to control them before the borers have an opportunity to enter the plant. Once they're in there, you can use a toothpick or a paper clip or something, but it's essentially impossible to control them.
All right, and you'll be having to borrow zucchini from whoever left it on your front porch.
Well, if you grow 2 zucchini plants, you probably got enough,
Yeah,
right?
one can feed a small community.
Exactly.
Plenty.
You speak from experience, do you, Matt?
Lots of zucchini on one plant.
Okay, this is a Parkston, South Dakota viewer, and she says her fertilizer spreader tipped over. She has a big old brown spot in her yard. Will the turf come back? She did scrape as much of the fertilizer off as she could. She watered it. She's been watering every day. Is that the right thing to do?
Generally, if you do spill fertilizer, the best thing you can do is almost go and vacuum it up if you have the opportunity to do so. Because depending on what kind of fertilizer it is, that spot is probably going to be there for a year or two just because of the amount of, let's say, nitrogen that was put in the soil in that one spot. So watering it in might help a little bit, but in the long run, that spot's probably going to stay there at least throughout this year. And next year you might see some of the, really dark green spot, but the grass is growing if it comes back in. Another thing would be just to dig out some of that soil, replace with new, spread that soil over a larger area just to spread out that high amount of fertilizer.
All right, thank you, Matt. Amy, peony night. We did have a picture a couple weeks ago of some kind of twisted, blasted stems. One of our viewers saw that and said they have the same problem. Same thing happened last week. Wondered about, is this something it grows out of? What are we seeing? And I will say that I've seen some peonies that look like that, and they're kind of growing out of it.
Probably growing out of it. With them being that twisted, I would look toward environmental conditions, especially those cool nights. We warmed up and then all of a sudden we dropped back down, especially if you were in western Nebraska last week, you had snow. And so that sudden shock to them just kind of twisted them up. And then last week we had, 5 days of rain. And so it was cloudy and cold. And so things really slowed down growing and developing. And so with that, they've kind of twisted. Give them some time. As long as we're having some heat and some sun, they should grow right out of it. So wouldn't be too concerned. If it continues over the next couple of weeks, even with the sun, then probably should take a picture of it and let us take a look at it, because then there's something else going on.
All right, thanks, Amy. Sarah from Cozad, this person has put down mulch around their plants to inhibit the weeds. Good idea. And then it has been suggested to them that he fertilize, doesn't say what kind of fertilizer or how to get it through the mulch. And I'm guessing it's probably landscape plants rather than vegetables or something like that.
So the products that you're probably going to find at the garden center would be a granular product for trees and shrubs, something along that line, or you could even use Osmocote, something like that. My preference would be for a granular product over a water-soluble fertilizer, because the water-soluble is going to be very quick release, but then it'll be gone fairly quickly too. So what I would do is probably apply it, side dress it along the base of your plants, and then scratch it into the mulch a little bit so that it's not just laying right on the surface of the soil, and then water it in, or apply it just before we get a rain, so that the fertilizer will be dissolved and then it'll move down into the root system so the plants can pick it up.
All right, and is it necessary to do that right away, do you think, or see how the
Well,
plants do?
generally with well-established landscape plants, unless there's some obvious sign of a nutritional deficiency, then we generally don't recommend doing a lot of fertilizer. And for trees, if they're in a lawn area and the lawn is being fertilized, then usually they get plenty of fertilizer from that too. So with new plants, newly planted things, we also don't recommend a whole lot of heavy fertilizer on those too, really, if any at all, because nitrogen fertilizer will promote leaf growth when really what we need right now is root development. So generally, no, we wouldn't recommend a lot of heavy fertilizer even on new plants like this.
Thanks for staying with us here on Backyard Farmer. Later on in the program, our turf specialist, Bill Kreuzer, will tell us what to do with those grass clippings. You can still phone in your questions by dialing 1-800-676-5446. While you're doing that, we will start the lightning round. You ready, Sarah?
I'm ready.
Will sour cherries pollinate sweet cherries?
Yes, as long as they're blooming at the same time.
Excellent. Several questions about the bridal wreath or Van Hoot spirea this year, some of them thin in the middle, some of them too tall. Can they be taken down to about 18 inches, and if so, when?
You can cut them back severely, but it would be better if you did that more in the dormant season rather than now. They put a lot of energy into leaf growth just recently. Cutting them back now could actually have a stunting effect. So I would just cut out the dead.
All right. Is there any product that can be used to get rid of suckers on a linden without hurting the tree?
There are some products that will slow the suckers down. Phenoli, which contains glufosinate, or there's a product called Sucker Stopper. Now, it won't stop them completely, but it'll slow them down.
All right. A 4-stem Royal Frost birch, he only wants 3. Can he prune one out?
You could. I would just conserve them though, because who never knows, you might have one die.
Exactly. Keep them until the one goes.
Yeah, one may
right.
go on its own.
All right, thanks, Sarah. Okay, Amy, strawberries, this viewer has sunken blackened stems on them already. What is that?
That is anthracnose, common soil fungus. It'll be best to prune them out as much as possible and applying mulch so those runners are not laying directly on the soil line.
All right. Blackened edges on the newly emerged oak leaves. What is that going?
It's a little early to be seeing any anthracnose on the oak leaves. It probably could be environmental to that cold spell that we had as the leaves were emerging out.
Okay. A Bloomfield viewer has rubbery stems on their rhubarb. Is that a crown rot situation?
It definitely could be a crown rot. I would check the soil moisture in there and pull back any of the mulch if it is really wet underneath there.
All right. Is there any preventative for late blight in tomatoes?
Preventative and late blight, variety selection is your biggest key with that, and looking for healthy plants in the nursery setting and removing any cull plants that you have from last year if you have any late blight situations.
All right.
And scouting diligently for late blight
Okay. In other words, go look at your garden.
every day.
All right. You ready, Matt?
Yes.
When can buffalo grass plugs be taken out of an existing lawn? And this is in Gothenburg.
Taken out of an
To
existing.
plug a new area, it sounds like.
I would say anytime after it greens up and it's growing and it's greened up completely, which would be pretty soon if
Okay.
it's greening up.
Okay. Omaha viewer says the fountain grass has seeded into the regular old lawn. Can you control one without killing the other?
Oh, fountain grass is tough. I really don't know the best way of doing it other than taking those out physically, so removing them.
Okay. Is there a shade turf that is not a water hog?
Shade turf that's not a water hog. That would be, I would say, one of the fine fescues. They do very well with limited water, and they also do well in the shade.
All right. What is the active ingredient for the weeds in weed and feed?
In weed and feed, there is usually a 2,4-D and Mecoprop. So both of those work pretty well. And there's also dicamba in them in a weed and feed. So that's a granular product, a little bit safer than some of the liquid versions.
All right. Excellent. Nice job. You ready, Fred?
I'm ready.
So people are really interested in bee hotels. This viewer wants to know how far away from the house should you put the bee hotel?
Oh, well, these are all solitary bees, so, they don't defend their nest. So you can put it just as close as you would like to.
Excellent. We have a viewer who found a woolly bear caterpillar
Oh, cool.
now. Does that mean winter is almost here?
That it's early enough in the season yet that there are still woolly bears around. And again, it doesn't surprise me.
Okay. Are mosquito dunks safe for turtles in ponds? Those.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. They would have no effect only on the insects, only on the mosquitoes.
Excellent. What is the best treatment for Japanese beetles?
Oh goodness! So I assume we're talking about adults. One of the insecticide products. I mean, bifenthrin or permethrin or one of those products.
Okay. When do we start looking for tobacco budworm?
Boy, pretty quick. They overwinter in the south and then they move northward. So, probably late May, early June.
Excellent. Nice job, all. You all kind of gave.
Oh, Fred
Give
got
me the
it.
win
Good
there.
job,
Fred
Fred.
won. Hey.
Oh,
And no, I didn't throw the dice at you. All right, Sarah, what has Gladys shared with us today?
Well, we've got two really pretty plants here and both grow from bulbs. So this one here in the front, this is an ornamental allium, ornamental onion, actually. Allium giganteum is the botanical name for this. They're hardy to zone 5, so they will overwinter here. And they get to be, usually 2.5 feet or so tall, although there's lots of different species of ornamental alliums. Some have much bigger heads than this, some are smaller, like the drumstick, but they all make a really nice accent in a garden. Now the other plant that Gladys has brought for us are these pretty lighter lavender ones in the back. This is called Spanish bluebells, and native to Portugal and Spain, as the name implies, also grows from a bulb, and it can really propagate itself and spread itself out in your garden. So this is one to maybe kind of keep contained a little bit, but very, very pretty flowers.
So as always, she's brought us a great combination, and
You bet.
we appreciate her sharing the largesse of her garden.
That's right.
All right, Fred, you get the next question. And you get this one, even though it's probably not an insect, but the person who saw it thought maybe the insect had caused this damage. And this is on quince, flowering quince.
So you mean those look like galls? I mean, so it'd be easy to say, well, those are galls, but actually they're not. I think that what they're called are fruit mummies, and so this is what's left over after a rust disease. In this case, on quince, and we see that on cedar apple rust and
Cedar hawthorn.
cedar hawthorn, a number of different rust diseases. So while they look like galls, they are not. And maybe Amy can expand on that a little bit.
Well, it's on quince, it's not going to provide a inoculum source of spores for the disease anymore. But if it's unsightly, you can just go pull them off, and it doesn't hurt the tree at all.
Perfect. And it's a good reminder to our viewers. Make sure you know what it is,
exactly.
whether it's an insect or not. All right, Matt, we have another invasive sort of a situation, and this is an Ord viewer who says this has made its way into her turf. What is that?
Another patch grass, or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
This one almost looks like it is downy brome, possibly, or some sort of other annual grass. It's kind of hard to tell from this picture, but if it is that, then mowing it is going to take care of it, and with time that grass should eventually disappear when we get into the warmer days of the summer.
All right, and it's kind of hard to make those lawns look perfect when we have all
Yes.
these other things that want to fly in.
Yep, or cut it out. That was a small, if that's the only clump you have, or if you have a couple of them, just cut them out.
All right, thanks, Matt. Sarpy County viewer, Amy, a hosta, one of them is looking like this. The others are all right. She's wondering if she should rogue it out. Is it fungal, viral, or insecticidal?
It looks like it could potentially be a crown rot of that hosta. Would really advise that you dig it up. You can split it to see how rotten it is on the inside. You may be able to salvage some components of it depending on how that entire crown looks like. Otherwise, it's a great opportunity right now to replace that hosta with another healthy plant. If you're going back in with a hosta, make sure that you're not overwatering, because usually we see crown rots and hostas if we've had too much water. So just try to monitor that water this spring.
All right, thank you, Amy. Sarah, two different viewers, two different hostas, or hydrangeas, sorry. One is Nico Blue that has a little bit of white foliage and had a few last year, and the other is Sykes Dwarf, and it also has some whitish, and it's a little sparse. Any ideas?
Well, so the picture on the screen right now makes me think that this plant is a little unhealthy and that there may be some issues with just how vigorous it is. Again, maybe there's a root rot issue or something going on there, and because it almost looks like really advanced chlorosis where the leaves are turning almost white, but you still have some green on the veins of the plant. So I'm wondering if there's an underlying issue with this plant that's causing these stems to be so unthrifty that we're seeing this white foliage. Now on the first picture, that was really odd because those leaves almost looked healthy except they were white. So sometimes, occasionally in plants, we can see mutations where the tissue will revert from the natural green to a white like this. Usually the white sections don't photosynthesize well, so usually they die out, fairly easily on their own. It's not going to be productive, so what I would do is I would just trim it out. We can also see some effects from herbicides causing whitening in foliage. Roundup can cause white foliage, so can tenacity, which I think Bill mentioned last week. So be careful with herbicide usage in your landscapes too, because that could be causing some of this as well.
All right, thank you, Sarah. Well, grass clippings can make a great mulch for our flower beds or our vegetable gardens. They can also be an essential part of our compost bins. We've had some questions about using grass clippings from turf that's been treated with pesticides or herbicides in mulch, or recycling them into our compost. So Extension Turfgrass Specialist Bill Kreuzer will help us decide what to do with that big pile of clippings.
A lot of times people ask, what should I do with my clippings when I'm mowing the lawn? And the thing not to do is put them in the trash. And one thing we can do with our clippings is put them into a compost pile. A good effective compost pile, the carbon-nitrogen ratio generally has a lot of carbon. And so we can add things like grass clippings that have a lot of nitrogen in it to help break down those, that compost. So when would I not want to apply or add clippings to my compost pile? That would be whenever you put down a herbicide or some kind of pesticide onto your lawn, at least a couple of weeks until you start recycling those clippings back into that compost pile. And why is that? Well, some of our products, especially products that contain the herbicide chlorpyrrolid, they can persist in the clippings and they can have negative impacts on the plants that we're going to try to grow in that compost in the future. And so that's the kind of a plant that, we wouldn't want to add that herbicide to our grass and then take those clippings and put them into our compost pile. A good alternative to adding our clippings to our compost pile is just some mulch mow. These clippings, again, have a lot of fertility value, and so returning them back into the soil helps out reducing our fertility requirements. But from a pesticide perspective, I don't have to worry about is there still pesticide in these clippings or not? Is it safe for me to put into my compost pile? And so, even this time of year when the grass is growing very vigorously, we really recommend not bagging. If the grass is growing very quickly, just raise your mower height a notch or two and try to get your yard back under control and then bring your mowing height back down to the normal height. So to avoid any potential issues with pesticides getting into our compost piles, especially herbicides that can hurt plants that we're trying to grow in that compost later on, let's just return those clippings and keep them out of that compost pile. It's definitely the easier thing to do. In addition to composting, a lot of gardeners want to take these clippings and put them and mulch around their plants in their garden as a way to add some fertility and to hold on to some of that soil water by putting these clippings onto our turf. And if they're treated with a pesticide, again, some type of a herbicide, that's not really the thing that we'd want to do, because these products could potentially then move to the desirable plants in our garden. So we want to be very, very careful when it comes to mixing or mulching around our plants with turf grasses treated with a different kind of pesticide. So in conclusion, we really just want to keep the grass in the grass. Let's keep it on the ground. Let's not bag it. It's going to make mowing go a lot faster. It's healthier for our lawn, and it minimizes the risk of any type of herbicide impact on our desirable plants.
So the best answer is to not bag that grass and let it fertilize your lawn. And of course, you can still use your clippings if you haven't treated your lawn with anything. It takes a whole lot less time to not bag.
Yes. I agree.
All right, Fred, picture for you, and this is actually a couple of euonymus. Sarah brought in one that was pruned. This is one that had this stuff in it. What is that and what to do about it?
Well, these are aphids, and apparently they've been fairly abundant in southeast Nebraska and certainly on campus in the last. In the last few weeks. Again, generally, these are cool season pests, and generally the natural enemies come in, and they are rarely turn out to be a serious problem. It'll be a few leaves here, a few leaves there. If they're very abundant and they're causing a lot of cupping and a lot of curling, and they're abundant on the plant, you could treat them with almost any product, even something like maybe even insecticidal soap or neem oil or one of those would work pretty well. But generally, natural enemies come in, take care of those in the next few weeks. So I wouldn't do anything right now. I just sort of watch them, and unless they really start being a problem, don't do anything.
Okay, perfect. All right, Matt, the dreaded nutsedge has raised its head already in some locations. Is it early, and what in the world to do?
What to do? Generally, it's probably early in bare areas like this. I'm assuming that's next to a sidewalk and it's a little warmer. Nutsedge usually doesn't come until soil temps are in the 60s or above, and I'm guessing there it is, so that's why the nutsedge is doing so well. There's a couple products, I mean, short of pulling it, which isn't going to cure it, it's just going to come back from tubers underground is where it originates from, and they just continually spread and the patch gets larger and larger every year. There's a couple products containing halosulfuron and another one that's sulfentrazone. Both of those work very well at controlling it, and as soon as you see it is the best time to treat, and then usually a follow-up application is necessary. And those two products work mainly they work better when the plant's young. When it gets big and it starts making more tubers underground, it's just better to control it early.
Okay, excellent. It is sort of fun to pull if the
Yes,
soil's
it's easy
wet.
to pull, but it doesn't cure it. It doesn't get rid of it.
It just makes it mad.
Yep.
All right, Amy, this is actually two questions about two plants that are both in the poplar, the willow family. First is Omaha. These are aspens in his lawn. He wonders what is going on here. And the second is an Albion viewer that has a weeping willow that looks like it also has the same sort of situation.
Okay. Willows are very common to get a canker development, fungal cankers in there. The first, or we'll talk about this picture right now. That canker is developed lower down and it's killed the upper part of that tree. It may sucker up and start producing from the suckers, but I will let Sarah talk about how well the suckers would actually be as a tree. But the first picture, there's a huge canker on the bottom. It's definitely going to impact the movement of water and nutrients in that tree. How long will the tree survive? That's a really hard one to say. We're probably going to see a decline in the amount of foliage in the tree, maybe a little yellow in coloration, and then eventually over time we're going to lose more of that foliage. So where that's at, it's not an ideal place to be able to prune it out or cut that spot out because it's at the base of that junction of that tree. So eventually you will end up losing that entire tree to that canker amount of time. It could be 1 year, 2 years, 4 years before you have to replace the tree, but something to be looking at.
All right, thanks, Amy. Not good news, but that's the way it goes.
It is.
All right, Sarah, lilac season is already over in some locations. This is a Norfolk viewer who has this beautiful one. The trouble is the flowers are hardly noticeable because it is so lush. She did switch to buffalo grass. She uses milorganite in her own compost. She's wondering if it's being over-fertilized by those two products. What should she do here?
I really don't think fertility is the problem here. What I've noticed on lilacs is that some flower bud death, and I think the flower bud death happened over the winter, and so the buds that would have been on the outer part of that plant and would have been more showy have died. And so all you're left with are the more protected buds that were on the inner part of the plant. I've seen quite a few plants that have actually done this, not even outside of the lilac group, but it's funny, you'll see the blooming happening at the base of the plant, but nothing on the top. So in this case, there wasn't a whole lot you could have done unless you were to provide some extraordinary winter protection for this plant. Go ahead and trim it back if the plants are too big, but hopefully, we won't have difficult winters, although that's silly to say for Nebraska. But hopefully the flower buds will survive in years to come and you'll have a better show.
All right, thank you, Sarah. Well, we have a whole pile of announcements tonight about cool things in the landscape and gardening world, and I believe the first one is the Sunset Hills Garden Club plant sale. Excuse me. Again, this Saturday, May 7th in Omaha. And our second one is the Men's Garden Club plant sale, Friday and Saturday, also in Omaha, with a number on the screen for that one. Our third announcement for this evening is the River City Cactus and Succulent Society 31st Annual Show and Sale, also in Omaha at Lauritsen Gardens, and that is 2 weeks from now. And our final one for the evening is the Planting Time Always Garden Club Annual Plant and Garden Sale, May 14th, Carter Lake, with a number on the screen. So lots of fun plant sales going on for people who just can't stand not planting something. Me.
Me.
Okay. Okay, Fred, speaking of Japanese beetles, a Papillion viewer wants to know whether we have any idea how bad they're going to be this year.
Oh goodness. You know, it was a relatively mild winter, and I see nothing that would have slowed them down. So I would expect that it ought to be probably about like it was last year, or, you know, maybe even a little worse. So
Alrighty.
probably not good news.
Especially if you're in that part of the state that
Yeah,
really has a
it's-
problem
yes.
with them. Yeah. Mankato, Kansas,
Let's have it.
brome grass in the iris bed.
Brome grass and the iris bed.
Yeah.
The product I mentioned earlier, the Grass Be Gone, which is Filosofop. That one should be able to use safely around the irises. Check the label, but I think it is on the label. But if you can, try and direct that spray towards the grass only and keep it off of the irises, and that should be a control.
All right, excellent. Amy, a Lincoln viewer with tomatoes, planted them yesterday close to the
Wow.
house on the east, pinched off some leaves that had brown spots, and there are more brown spots today already, about 1/4 of an inch in diameter.
I would find it hard to believe that it's actually a disease at this point in time. You know, we'd be looking at early blight and septoria, and they haven't been in contact with the soil at this point in time. It's probably more an environmental component. Depending on how well you harden them off, sometimes if we have water droplets on there and a hot, heavy sun like we had today, we'll actually end up with a little bit of sunburn on them. So just hold off, see how they progress, and just give them a little bit of time.
All right, thanks, Amy. Sarah from Brainerd, a shrub rose, 10 years old. It's too close to a larger shrub, is not thriving. She wonders if it is potentially too large to move.
Well, you know, not knowing exactly how big it is, it's really more a question of your ability, you know, to handle it. If you can dig up a good-sized root ball and get the root ball fairly deep, I would try to go, you know, 12 inches or more, so that you have a really good root mass there. Then you could potentially move it, and I would also cut some of the foliage down so that there's not quite so much top growth for the roots to try to support as they're reestablishing in the new site. But if you can physically handle it, then you might be able to do it successfully. It's going to be a work.
Yeah, exactly. All right, thank you, Sarah. All right, Fred from Falls City, a viewer has a honeysuckle vine, little insects on the vine eating. Is it honeysuckle aphids already?
Yeah, it could be.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so, you know, honeysuckle aphids are difficult to control. They overwinter on the last year's honeysuckle on the witch's brooms that you get. And so the time to treat would be right about now, just about as those, as the new material, the new leaves and terminals are beginning to expand. So now be a treatment, then maybe another one, in maybe a month or so, because there's a couple of generations.
All right, thank you, Fred. Matt, in Lincoln, any fertilizer and dandelion control that is safe for dogs on the lawn?
Fertilizer. Most fertilizers are safe as long as the dog doesn't have the ability to actually like eat it off the grass. So a good thing to do is water it in. That way they don't have access to it. Maybe keep them off the lawn until it is watered in. Same with the products for weed control. You don't want to spray it and then let the dog run, or kids, for instance. It's best to, you know, at least let that product get down into the soil level. Wait a couple days, maybe even before you let the dogs run around out there, or the kids.
All right, thanks, Matt. Amy, rose or rosette showing up this time of year? What are we potentially seeing?
There's a possibility that we could be seeing a little bit of rose rosette, but it's important to think of two components. Number one, we will see some red leaves if we have a red or a pink rose come out. And the other big component that we have seen some similarities to rose rosette is if you made any glyphosate applications near that rose when it was still dormant. When we have that application, the plants are still absorbing a little bit of the glyphosate. So at that point in time, we can see some mimicking of rose rosette. It will grow out of it, but it's usually a wait and see. So at this point in time, we're going to wait a couple weeks and see how it looks.